All right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. As-salatu was-salamu ala Rasulil Nabi al-Kareem. So today we continue on with the topic of zakat. And today we'll be discussing who are the eligible recipients of zakat. So prior to this, we spoke about some basic outline of zakat and some rules related to zakat. So inshallah, today we'll talk about who you are able and you can give zakat to, and who you cannot give zakat to. So we'll begin. قال الله تعالى في القرآن المجيد بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمساكين والعاملين عليها والمؤلفة قلوبهم وفي الرقاب والغارمين وفي سبيل الله وابن السبيل. So this entire topic, it comes back to this ayah of the Quran where Allah Ta'ala says that sadaqat, meaning zakat here, Allah Ta'ala is speaking about zakat. The zakat is for the fuqara, masakin, which I will explain each person. So let's so Allah Ta'ala clarifies these 8 categories, right? And amongst these 8 categories of individuals, inshallah, we'll go through every single one and I'll explain what each one refers to. And he says, فَهَذِهِ ثَمَانِيَةُ أَصْنَافٍ. These are 8 categories. فَقَدْ سَقَطَ مِنْهَا الْمُؤَلَّفَةُ قُلُوبُهُم. He says, right off the gate, right? There's one of the categories is al-mu'allafatu qulubuhum, right? That the people who you give them zakat to bring their hearts closer towards Islam. So one definition is regarding those people who recently accepted Islam, for example, and to bring their hearts closer towards Islam, Nabi Sallallahu would give them zakat. He would give them some money, right? So regarding this, he says, the author, he says that Allah Ta'ala, meaning this category of people, they are no longer eligible recipients of zakat. And he says, لأن الله تعالى أعز الإسلام وأغنى عنهم. Because Allah Ta'ala has honored Islam, and Allah Ta'ala, and now the Sharia is now, or the deen is now no longer dependent on them. Deen does not need them. Deen does not need to pay people to come closer towards Islam. You know, and why? It sounds bad, right? It sounds like, why are you paying someone to come closer to Islam? Basically, the general mindset of humans, unfortunately, is that, especially back in those days, especially when you see someone, a group of people, a movement being successful financially, generally that means that that's a successful movement, right? So if you see that they're winning wars, they're able to conquer other lands and other areas, and they're gathering money, that means that these are a successful group of people. So this was essentially the mindset of that time, that if you are, if you have money and you're giving money also, that means that they're receiving some dunyawi benefits as well, right? So it's just a matter of just encouraging them towards Islam. So there's a story regarding this, right? So he says, فَلَمَّا قُبِضَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ جَاءَتِ الْمُؤَلَّفَةُ إِلَىٰ أَبِي بَكْرَ رَضِيَ اللَّهُ. So the story, I'll just say the English, right? Where when the Prophet ﷺ passed away, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was Khalifa for how long? About 2 years. About 2 years he was Khalifa, right? So these people, this mu'allafat qulubum, these people, they came to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, and they asked Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu to give them the regular amount, that give us some money, right? So Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he wrote a letter, and he said, take this letter to Umar radiallahu anhu. So they took this letter to Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, so that they could so that they can take some share. So Umar, he took this letter, he read it, and he ripped it to shreds. Umar, he ripped it in front of them, right? And now they're like shocked, right? So Umar, he says, listen, la hajata lana bikum. He says, we don't need you. We don't need, if you are a person who's, and Umar was always a very, very outspoken, very loud and very powerful individual, right? So if he felt something was wrong, he would say it and he would do it, right? Many stories in this regard, right? And there are many ayat that came down in correspondence to the statements of Umar radiallahu anhu, right? This is how much basira, how much foresight he had. He had so much foresight that he would think certain things. He would go to the Prophet ﷺ and say, Ya Rasulullah, I think this should be part of the Sharia. And Allah Ta'ala would send down Quran corresponding to the statements of Umar radiallahu anhu. Amazing. Amazing person he was. which proves that we should be people who are constantly progressive in thinking, right? And we should always be thinking of ways to further the deen, right? It shouldn't be that the deen should come to us, or it shouldn't be that um, the masjid or the people of the masjid, they have to present something to us, but rather we should be the ones that say, hey, listen, I've seen this as an issue, I want to fix it, and so on and so forth. But anyway, so Umar radiallahu anhu, he was that type of individual. So he says that, listen, we don't need you. Allah Ta'ala has honored Islam. Islam does not need you. If you accept Islam, good. If you don't accept, leave. Basically, that way. He said, if you don't accept Islam, then we can fight it out. Basically, that's what his words are. So now they go back to, again, these are people who are shararati people, right? They're like, you know, like they want to start problems. So they go back to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. They said to him, are you the Khalifa or is Umar radiallahu anhu the Khalifa? Right? So now they're trying to like push Abu Bakr, like edge him on. And these are, subhanAllah, amazing. These were true human beings, right? If it was me or you know, and we wrote a letter or we authorized something, we are the CEO of the company, for example, and our, you know, someone else, they contradict what we say, what would we do? Where, how can this person, who is this person, who does he think he is, right? We would be arrogant and we would say, this person, bring his head, or we would like fire him, whatever we would do, right? Amazing. Abu Bakr, an amazing person. So Umar is amazing. Abu Bakr is also an amazing person. So then he says such an amazing statement. He says, he will be the Khalifa, inshallah. Amazing, right? I laugh, I smile so much whenever I see this thing. He says, Huwa inshallah, he will be the Khalifa, inshallah. Right? He doesn't allow these people to divide them. He says, he will be the Khalifa, inshallah. So he doesn't even care about what they're saying. And then he passed, you know, the decree of Umar. Whatever Umar he did and he said, Abu Bakr endorsed that opinion. And so therefore, from that point onwards, that was now a cancellation of that eighth category or that one category. The scholars, so some scholars, they respond to a possible objection. Some people may raise the objection, how is it that they're doing this, right? Allah Ta'ala said in the Quran, right? So how is it that they're, you know, quote unquote contradicting, na'udhu billah? Because of course, Sahaba can never contradict the Quran, na'udhu billah, right? Umar radiallahu anhu, he was kana waqqafan 'inda kitabillah. It's mentioned regarding Umar radiallahu anhu that he was waqqaf, like he would stop, like that was his barrier, like that's his red light. If something came in the Quran, he would never contradict it. So how can we imagine that Umar would contradict Quran? So the scholars, they respond that this was actually basically mansukh, right? Meaning the abrogation happened regarding this ayat. And how would we know this? Based on the ijma' of the Sahaba. The Sahaba unanimously agreed on this. Otherwise, if they did not agree, then the Sahaba were not silent people. They were not people that would say, you know what, okay, you know what, Umar did it, I'm scared of Umar and I'm not going to do anything. No, no. They're not silent people. If they disagreed and they would have voiced their opinion. Abu Bakr as the Khalifa, we know the famous story where he said that if the people, they prevent even the rope by which they used to tie the camels or they used to tie the animals to give in zakat, I would wage war against these types of people. So you think that Abu Bakr would remain silent? You think he's scared of Umar radiallahu anhuma? No, no. Rather, it's that the ruling was abrogated, and that's why they did this. So moving on. So one category done. Right. Now we're going to go into the other remaining 7 categories. So the first, faqir. Right. We mentioned the first category is fuqara. Faqir. Faqir is the singular and fuqara is the plural. So he mentions that the faqir is the one, man lahu adna shay. He has very less. Faqir is someone who has very less. And then second category is miskin. Right? And miskin is the one who has nothing. Right? They say faqir is the one who has very less. Miskin is the one who has nothing. And then according to other scholars, they say the opposite, that the faqir is the one who has nothing, the miskin is the one who has very less. Again, just semantics and words, right? But basically, they're both included. That the one who has less or the one who has nothing. And when we say less, we mean what? Less than nisab, obviously, right? Anything less than nisab amount. Other scholars, they explain that the faqir is the one who does not ask the people. He needs, but he doesn't ask the people. So that's a faqir. And then miskin is the one who does ask the people. So they're both poor, they're both in need, but one asks and the other one does not ask. So Allah Ta'ala says, zakat is, you can use zakat for both of these types of people, right? So that's true. Now, again, does this mean we are encouraging asking and begging? No, we're not, right? And as I've said before as well, that we should discourage this attitude of constantly begging and asking others. Ask Allah Ta'ala. Ask Allah Ta'ala. Only turn to Allah Ta'ala. If you are in severe need, then of course speak to some close relatives. But as I said, nowadays we find this common trend of people regularly going to, for example, GoFundMe's and these other types. Try not to do that. May Allah Ta'ala protect and save us all. In a hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he says that the one who opens the door of begging, Allah Ta'ala will not close that door on them. Right? So as much as humanly possible, never open that door of begging. Right? If you need to, if you are in dire need, and speak to some close family, close friends, and say, listen, I would like to borrow some money. Please allow me to borrow some money. I'm in some difficult situations. Please help me out. Right? And those types of conversations. But I highly discourage opening up GoFundMe's and those things for yourself. If you're doing it for other people, if you're doing it for, let's say, someone you know is poor and they need it and they're not going to ask, it's okay. You can start something on their behalf. But generally, we should not ask for ourselves. All right. Any questions so far? Pretty simple. But okay, first two. So we covered three categories so far, right? The fourth category. والعامل يدفع إليه الإمام إن عمل بقدر عمله. He says that technically according to, I mean, so this is the fourth category, that this is the amil, the one who works for zakat. وَالْعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا. Allah Ta'ala says those who worked for their zakat, meaning they're the zakat collectors. But he mentions it very clearly. He says that this is who the imam hires. Imam who? Not me. The imam of the government, the Islamic government. When they hire this person to be the zakat collector, then the imam will give him some amount based on his efforts. The imam will give him some amount from the zakat to cover his expenses, right? Basically to pay his salary. They'll use the zakat money. So this is the fourth category. Now, this opens the door to another problem, or issue which I've discussed multiple times here before as well, which is the mas'ala regarding zakat organizations, right? Or organizations collecting zakat and taking a percentage of the zakat. I've mentioned this before as well, that this is not for organizations, or this is not for zakat or just any zakat collector, but rather this is for the Islamic government. Why? Because technically what happens behind the scenes, right, is that the poor people, the less fortunate, they are making, quote unquote, technically, they are making the Islamic government their representative to collect the zakat from other people. Because the poor people, they cannot go and collect from every single person. So they are technically making the Islamic government their representative to go and collect zakat on their behalf. And so therefore, they're allowing for this. And so this is a shari'i right. A shari'i right that's given from the poor people to the Islamic government, and by extension from the Islamic government to the zakat collector as well. Okay? So this does not apply to any and every zakat organization. And this is a common day issue that we see nowadays, where many zakat collecting organizations are taking percentages from the zakat. And this is something which many scholars, they disagree with. There are some scholars that say it's okay, but many scholars, they disagree with this, and they say that you're opening a door of problems. Why? Because now, let's say Abdullah is collecting zakat, right? Abdullah is collecting zakat on behalf of Abdul Rahman. He's saying Abdul Rahman needs some zakat, so I'm going to take zakat from you guys, right? So now he goes out, collects zakat, right? Now he collects $1,000. Now he thinks to himself, okay, why? Because money brings greed, right? So now he takes 1,000. He's like, oh man, I'm not benefiting from this, so I should take a percentage. Now he's taking a percentage, right? And then he's giving it. Now every single person who's taking some zakat, who's collecting zakat, is going to start doing this. They're going to start misusing the fatwa, right? So therefore, to completely close this door, we say that this is not applying to any and all zakat organizations. Also, second point, The zakat organizations are not appointed by the poor. Who are they appointed by? The rich. The rich. Why? Because, for example, the wealthy, not rich, but wealthy. Right? So, for example, I'm giving zakat to an organization, and they will take the zakat and then distribute it to the poor. So, who are they representing? Me. They're representing the wealthy people, right? They're not representing the poor people. They're representing the wealthy people. So, therefore, there's a distinction, right? There's a difference between when in the Islamic government, the poor people are making the Islamic government their representative, and so therefore the Islamic government is appointing someone to collect the zakat on their behalf, and then they're giving him something as well. Right? But and at the same, on the other hand, here in this scenario, what's happening is that zakat organizations are taking it and they're representing the wealthy, and they're using the zakat. The problem here is that in the Islamic government, you have oversight. You have oversight, meaning this like the government is controlling it, the Islamic government is controlling it. Here, there's no oversight. An organization who's using zakat, they can take as much as they want, according to that view, right? So they're taking 15, 20, 30%, 40%, who knows? There's no oversight. They can take whatever they want. And their excuse is what? The excuse is that people do not give unless it's zakat. And that's a fairly true statement, that many people, they do not give sadaqah. Many people, they give zakat. Okay, maybe you give zakat, maybe you give sadaqah, but like smaller numbers generally. More people, they give, when they give zakat, they give in larger numbers, but when it comes to sadaqah, they give in smaller numbers. So therefore, my solution. Now, I've mentioned the problem, and I'm not a person who just brings problems and no solutions. Right? I'm a believer that if you have a problem, bring the solution as well. The solution is fairly simple. Solution is that when a zakat, of course, zakat, these organizations, these charity organizations, they need funds, overhead costs, they need admin costs to survive. Obviously, you have many, many different things. And using those fees, obviously, they're able to produce more and they're able to do more good things, right? So they need a certain amount of money that they use for, overhead costs. But that does not justify, the entire board having six-figure salaries and so on. That doesn't justify that, right? So then what's the solution? My solution is that two things. So one is that you have a general 5%, for example. I'm just giving a random number, right? But you have a percentage which is mandatory. This is you can consider a processing fee. That listen, we are sending money to, Bangladesh, for example, and we need this much money. We need this percentage of money to cover the processing fee, the credit card fee, this fee is that fee. So we need 5% to run the admin, for example, right? 5% to cover the admin fees, or 7%, let's say, for example. Including credit card fees are like 3%, for example, more or less. And then let's say another 4%, for example, for other things. So let's say about 7%, right? In my opinion, by the way, anything under 10% is reasonable. In my opinion, I have experience with many different charity organizations. I would say anything under 10% is decent, right? That's some more, right? So the solution for zakat organizations is that they should have a mandatory fee, and using that mandatory fee, they should cover all of their admin costs. That's one solution. A second solution, and again, these are practical solutions, right? I'm not giving like impractical solutions. I'm giving practical solutions. So you take 7%, but you just tell people that, listen, and I'm a firm believer that if you are clear and upfront with people, people will be more trusting with you. If you say, listen, this is it, 7% is 7%, we will not touch your remaining 93%. I think people are very reasonable. Anyways, that's my view. A second solution is that these charities, they should have a number or they should have like fundraisers to set up awqaf, to set up endowments, right? So there are some charities that do this, by the way. There are some charities that are doing this, where they have certain endowments. They purchase property, for example, and the income from those properties pay the salaries and they pay for the overhead costs. That I feel is very important as well, right? And now it's harder, it's more work, but that's the better option. And I say this across the board. I think every masjid, every charity organization, I think every single Islamic school, all of these need to move towards waqf. We all need to move towards waqf. And that's why all of us sitting here also, we need to build this mentality that we need to set up endowments which will benefit not only us and our graves, but also the broader community. We know that in the time of Uthman radiallahu anh, he gave waqf of a well, and the proceeds of that well, or that well was used to irrigate date trees, and the proceeds from those dates were sold. Again, you can sell endowments, you can sell it, right? But the proceeds must be used for a good purpose, which the endower, he will decide, he or she will decide. So for example, if you have, let's say, $100,000, and you're like, okay, you know what, this $100,000, I will invest it into something. For example, I'm not going to mention anything specific because then it'll be like an endorsement. So I'll just say general, right? You invest it into something, and you say that the proceeds from this, so let's say 10% you get from this, that 10% will be used for, or let's say 5% will be reinvested back into that business, and 5% will go to some charitable thing. They will go to this orphanage, will go to this thing, or go to that thing, for example. That's the best method to do, right? So for example, you can apply this on a larger scale and on a smaller scale, right? So for example, you can do the same, that, you know what, I'll set up a small business, right? And the proceeds from that business, 50% will go, 50% of the, okay, let's say you divide the profits into, for example, 3 or 4 parts. One share will go to me and my family, right? We will benefit from 1/4 of the profits. Second fourth of the profits, I will reinvest into the business, for example, right? Third share of the profits, I will invest in my local masjid, for example. Fourth share of the profits, I will set into endowments, waqf, right? Something we have to think like this. Otherwise, masajid are all majority dependent on donations. The vast majority of masajid are dependent on donations, right? And that's a very unfortunate reality. Same thing with Islamic schools. They're highly dependent on the fees and donations, right? And so that's why most of the Islamic schools in Northern Virginia, they charge how much? More than $1,000 for every single month. That's a lot. That's a lot of money, and that's unaffordable for many people. Many people, they don't send their kids to Islamic school. Why? Because of the money, right? So if we were to set up this awqaf, and again, this is not a 1-year plan, 2-year plan. This is decades plan. We have to plan for decades down the road. Not for my kids, for my kids' kids. I will not see the benefit of this, but inshallah, the waqf of Uthman radiallahu anhu, till today, it's benefiting the poor people. 1400 years ago, the waqf that he set up is till today benefiting the poor. So we can set up, again, as I said, so for example, maybe 1/4 of the profits you can use to pay off the salaries and everything else, So that also, for example, or maybe hiring somebody to manage the awqaf also. These are all very important things, right? We should all think along these lines, right? And so there are some charities that are doing this, right? I'm not going to mention any names because I don't want to endorse anything, but there are some charities, mashallah, I know them, and they are doing great work. Now, okay, in America, generally, you don't have charities that are working globally. Generally, to my knowledge, there's not a single charity in America that's doing global work that on that kind of level, to my knowledge, that is not taking administrative fees. Every single one, to my knowledge, in America, every single one generally is taking administrative fees, right? Now, what's the solution for us, right? Most of us, so what you're giving $100 of zakat. Now, what do you think? What's going to happen? Is $100 going? Unlikely. And you have to do your own research when you're donating zakat, especially when you're giving zakat. Zakat is fard, so you must make sure that your fard is being distributed properly. It's your responsibility, not theirs. It's your responsibility to make sure your zakat is distributed properly, right? So therefore, the responsibility would be what? You find out, ask them, how much is your overhead cost, admin cost? So then they'll tell you, maybe, let's say they say 7%, for example, right? Round it up, make it 10%, and then just assume that if you're giving $100, $90 is actually in zakat, and $10 goes to admin fees. Just assume that. For example, let's say someone is donating for Gaza, right? Now, For example, they're doing you don't have access to Gaza, for example. You cannot get funds into Gaza, for example, but you want to help the people of Gaza. So what do? You have to work with these charity organizations, 501c3, and of course, many people, they work for the government, and of course, they scrutinize every single thing that you do, and at the same time, you don't want to put yourself in a difficult situation where you're, you know, giving money to this person, that person, and then money is going around, and it's kind of complicated, and you don't want to get caught in something wrong, right? Even though you have good intentions, but maybe that person, they may misuse the money. Okay. So therefore, it's best to go through a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Now go through the organization, make sure what their admin costs are, and then deduct that from your zakat. Okay. So this is something that I highly recommend. This led to such a point. I was so like annoyed because like when I was in Dar Ifta, I wrote on this, right? This is one of the questions I wrote on, that are zakat organizations eligible to receive zakat? So I wrote in detail. It's still on the website. Um, so it came to a point where I was like, you know what? I'm going to start my own organization, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to start a charitable organization. But inshallah, I mean, one day I still have the thing in mind, that one day, inshallah, I will start my own organization, inshallah, or I'll make sure it's done in the proper manner, inshallah. Right? Um, so like, for example, nowadays people ask me, how to give zakat, where to give zakat. You can ask me, and I'll give you some recommendations. But there was a time where I would take people's zakat, mix with my own zakat, and then distribute it. But that was so much work. It was a lot of work. It was very difficult, because sometimes like there were people that gave me like thousands of dollars, and so like it's a lot of work, and then I would take care of all the fees also, because I mean I'm not going to take it from that person's money, so I would take care of all the fees, and so it was a lot of work. So nowadays I just recommend where to give zakat, and if you want recommendations, I'll tell you later, inshallah. Okay, we'll stop here, inshallah. I don't want to take too much time. We spent about half an hour, so I generally try to keep about half an hour. Any questions on what I mentioned?
Technical question.
Yeah.
Always talk about giving the person. Suppose I didn't I don't have the money. I know I owe the car, but I don't have the money. Borrow 500, give it, and then later on pay back that money. Is that permissible?
How would you not have it? Is it invested?
Yeah, it's not accessible to me.
Okay. So my recommendation would not be to borrow, right? I'm always against borrowing. I'm just like Sharia. I mean, Sharia is against borrowing, not just me, right? Sharia is against borrowing, being in debt. Ideally, as much as humanly possible, stay away from debt. As much as humanly possible. So then the solution is what? That once you have the money, once you're able to access the money, then backdate. Backdate for the past number of years. Let's say past 5 years, for example, you didn't give the zakat, so then you backdate for the past number of years.
It's not only paying the zakat, it's the need for this person to receive money for that moment.
Yeah, I mean, you try whatever you can do, you help however you can, but I would not recommend borrowing and then helping that person, because then you're in debt to somebody else. You don't want to die with debt, right? So but at the same time, if you owe zakat, you should write it down that I owe this much zakat. You know what I mean? So in case you pass away, everyone should have this, by the way. Everyone should have like a paper or something, some will, some wasiya, basically, that these are my assets, and you can put it somewhere safe. Obviously, make sure you keep it safe. Please, last thing is all your information is leaked, especially with all these scams. Just be very careful where you put it. Maybe in a locker, maybe in something. Make sure it's very safe. But you should have some, like, even if you don't want to keep like sensitive information, but at least just like a generic information, like, well, I owe zakat this much, for example. Date, for example, this year, this date, I owe this much zakat, and so on and so forth. I have not completed my Hajj, for example. I made intention for this much wasiyah, for example, and so on and so forth. I do highly recommend having a document like that. Any other questions? Okay, inshallah, we'll stop here. We'll continue.